everyone. We are back on the rubber match. Like I promised last week, we'd be back no matter what. Was hoping last week we'd be back for a good reason and not to recap this season. And we are back for a good reason. Arkansas able to take care of business in the Fayetteville Regional. They sweep through the weekend, beating North Dakota State in Game 1, Creighton in Game 2 that they played in the regional championship. Arkansas took care of business to go back to the Supers for the first time since 2022. Welcome into the rubber match. As always, I'm your host, Evan Kamiko. Excited to be back for another week. We'll have another episode next week. Can't promise what it's going to be about, but we've got to talk this week. We've got a whole bunch of stuff to break down. We'll get into our housekeeping in just a second. We've got Phil Elson, the Hogs radio play-by-play broadcaster, joining the show to preview Tennessee in Super Regional weekend. But first things first, let's do our housekeeping. Before that, I do want to start and give my overall thoughts on the regional because it went exactly how you wanted it to go if you were an Arkansas Razorback fan. No stress, no drama, no crazy numbers, no crooked runs by any Arkansas pitchers given up this weekend. Everybody was fabulous, I thought, all weekend long on the mound, besides maybe Aiden Jimenez, who didn't have his best stuff, but still 4 innings of work. Couple of strikeouts, a couple walks, which you don't like to see, was something that DVH talked about he wanted to avoid. But after that, pitching was lights out. Parker Coyle looked really good. Landon Beidelshees looked really good, closing out the North Dakota State game. Then on Saturday, Zach Root was stellar. And then Sunday, the combination of Gabe Gackle and Gage Wood, absolutely incredible. So let's get into some of our housekeeping stuff before we get you out to that interview with Phil. And as always, we're going to start with our Eloy Dinger count. They are up to 33 right now. Between the two brothers. Vahiva is up to 20. He had 2 this weekend, and he's just gotten, award finalist nominations all week. Golden Spikes Award, Dick Hauser Award for the best shortstop in college baseball. So that is just kind of everything he's doing Dick Hauser Heisman Trophy. The Brooks Wallace is the best shortstop in college baseball. Sorry, guys, there's just a lot of awards. It's tough to keep track, but we're going to do that here on the rubber match. We'll keep track. So that's where our dinger count is. As for our Gabe Gackle K count, he was stellar against Creighton in Game 2. 3 innings of work, 2 hits, 7 Ks. His K count this year up to 76. He's unlocked something going to the bullpen. We've talked about it almost every week. Phil and I will dive into it in just a little bit as well. So Gabe Gackle continues his good run of pitching. As for our field view, I'll say it. I was wrong. Didn't see Zach Root not starting Game 1. They went with Jimenez, but I think this is what we're going to be and what we're going to see all postseason. You have Davalon Thomas Jr., Logan Maxwell in the outfield, Brent Iredale at third. He made some really nice plays, and maybe he's going to get the bat going this week. That'd be something that the Hogs could absolutely use to only benefit this lineup. He's now hitting somewhere down around, I believe, like 270 right now, where at one point during conference play, he was up to 330, 350. Vahiva Loy at shortstop. We've talked about him already. Cam Kojal at second. Reese Robinette at first. Nice to see Robinette getting a couple knocks against Creighton as well, to see the bat going there. Again, this lineup maybe it doesn't have the depth it once did when you take away Nolan Souza and some of the other injuries to the Hogs, but good to see Robinette establishing himself at first base and having some success in the postseason. Ryder Helfrich, your Fayetteville Regional MVP behind the plate, and Zach Root on the mound. That is where we stand with our field view. And now, without further ado, let's take a very quick break, and we'll send things over, and we'll come back after the break with Phil Elson. Stick around. Rubber match. Going to be right back after this. Welcome back into the show. Excited to have radio play-by-play voice of the Arkansas Razorbacks joining, Phil Elson. Phil, thanks for being here.
Hey, Evan. Big week. Big week. This is fun.
It is a huge week. Every week is more and more fun. This is Super Regional Week. Phil, before we talk about the Tennessee series, I want to get your opinion on the regional round. It probably, in my opinion, couldn't have gone any better for the Razorbacks going 3-0. What'd you think of the regionals?
Yeah, I mean, there was no sweat. I mean, that's the way it came across. Just those regional rounds, you never really know what to expect because you're gonna get at least a couple teams that are coming in hot, and that's what happened. But Arkansas was just too overpowering, too much power at the plate, too much power on the mound, and it was just a really, really impressive weekend because I think Creighton was a pretty good team, and I was impressed with North Dakota State and some of their players. So, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It couldn't have gone any better because it never felt like anything was in jeopardy or anything was in doubt.
It's funny because beforehand all week, people around the media were saying that was probably one of the tougher regionals, and then Arkansas ends up cakewalking through. What impressed you the most about Arkansas's pitching staff specifically? Do you have a pitcher that was like, wow, that's who we thought they could be?
Oh, well, I mean, both Wood and Root are the ones that stand out to me because, I mean, I guess people have thought that starting pitching is a weakness of this team, but I don't think that's a weakness. I think part of it is in terms of how difficult it can be to get through some of the lineups that they've had to get through in the SEC, specifically near the end of the season. And that's what they got to face this in the Super Regional, which is a really tough line. I mean, if you're going to put any other team that's left in a Super Regional right now and think, does anybody offensively match up to Arkansas? I think the only other team you'd look at would be Tennessee. So, but both Root and Wood, I think they put on display the things that make them special and the things that they'll have to do in order to. They have to pitch at the same level against Tennessee, but last longer, I think, than the first time around. With Root, it's getting a breaking pitch over and establishing a changeup, and that's got to happen early. And for Wood to be able to stay with his fastball velocity at 96 to 97, which is where it seemed he was, stay at the top of the zone with that fastball and the bottom of the zone with a curveball, which is where he was, not in the middle of the plate, with that. I think happened a little bit against Tennessee. Those things stood out to me.
And there were moments where Gage Wood on that Sunday game was hitting 97. He was up to 98 at one point. I was checking the radar going, that almost feels a little bit faster than 97, faster than 98, than maybe what the fans see. And again, you had Parker Coyle in game one, who was magnificent, Gabe Gackle, really the whole pitching staff outside of Aiden Jimenez, who still pitched relatively pretty well, holding that North Dakota State lineup at check for most of his, 4 innings of work. It's what you wanted to see now heading into Tennessee. That's going to be an even better lineup than what, we've kind of already talked about.
Well, Jimenez still to me hasn't looked comfortable at all as a starting pitcher. I don't think he looked comfortable against North Dakota State. And I don't know if that was a matter of the moment, of being the person who's throwing the first pitch of the regional and a start instead of coming in relief. But I think the way that he's used in this super regional is a potential wild card because, this is the only point where you can shorten a 3-game series to 2 games at any point of the season, except to the College World Series finals. So if you have that opportunity to do so, I think they might give him the ball with the same situations that he has had leading up to when he was put into the starting rotation. That may work for him as long as, if you make it to Omaha and you can stay in the winner's bracket, I think that would work for him really well. So that's just something to think because he hasn't looked the same as a starter as he did in relief. I mean, I'm seeing even in terms of confidence, location, his stuff still seems to be all right, but just you never know about pitchers that change roles like that. Look at how much better Gackle's been as a reliever instead of a starter. So it's just things to think about.
Yeah, all fun scenarios, and especially with kind of the pitching and Jimenez. You saw him at his peak in that Florida series when they were able to go 1, 2, 3, boom, 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 and get the win on game 2. So curious, we'll talk a little bit about the hitting, then we'll obviously get into Tennessee this weekend. I know everybody, Ryder ended up being the MVP. He might have been almost like the most quiet MVP of any of these regionals because it just felt like to me Cam Kojal was going to be the guy to win MVP, and then Ryder sneaks in and ends up getting the award. But just the two of them in that middle of the order, how important was it for those guys to really get going, especially now setting up into this weekend?
Well, Helfrich had been going for a bit, and maybe the home runs might have stood bit. But I think the other aspect of why Helfrich is viewed as an MVP of that regional, and maybe right now of the team, is because of the position he plays and the premium that you put on. It isn't necessarily the fielding. I think there's a trust that goes along with the pitcher catcher relationship, and I think that's massive, and that's going to be important to see what happens when the backup catcher Stone Lawless has to catch game 1 for Tennessee. Because he hasn't really caught many SEC games. I understand he's caught bullpens of these guys, but there's a humongous difference between catching somebody in a bullpen and catching somebody in front of 12,000 people in a national audience in a super regional. I mean, it's not the same thing. So, there's another thing to think about. I mean, that relationship about trust matters a lot. And I also wonder, too, because Tennessee in the field is not equal to Arkansas in the field. They might be equal in terms of stuff on the mound and lineup depth, but Arkansas's fielders, outfielders and infielders, have just been better. some of the best in the country. That's why Vahiva Aloy is a finalist for the Golden Spikes. It's not just because he's a great hitter; he's an amazing shortstop. And I think that was a huge difference in the first series. It can be a gigantic difference in the Super Regional.
Yeah, and we saw in that first series, this the second game that the two played. An error by the second baseman caused a big Arkansas inning. So to your point, now you add in the backup catcher who's going to be starting in game one. How important do you think the atmosphere is going to be? Tennessee's seen this Baumwalker atmosphere. They know what they're walking into. They were here a month ago. How important do you think that's going to play into the factor of the greater landscape of this series?
I wondered, and part of it is because of the emotion that Tennessee plays with, that they're trying to get into the opponent's heads all the time with the slow down techniques, and I think some of the tough talk and a little bit of the way that they call their timeouts and all of that. But I think that the Arkansas fans will do everything they can to try to ensure that Tennessee players can't control that emotion. So that's going to be a really interesting aspect to this series, because one thing Arkansas does really well is they never let things bubble up to where it feels like the emotions carry the moment. The moment happens first. Tennessee carries their emotions to the moment, and sometimes that's where their big moments happen from. I think they can bubble over a little much. So maybe a home field advantage. I mean, that could be legitimate just in the terms of our fans do like to interact with the opposing players, like college baseball fans do. We just end up with a few more than most.
Yeah, I think there was the great moment of the fans who were, trolling the Creighton pitchers when they were getting set, going the 1, 2, 3 out loud. That just, I think, kind of rattled their closer who ended up starting the game. So curious, when you look at this Tennessee and the Arkansas matchup, we've talked about the defense. Pitching wise, right? Liam Doyle coming in, another guy who's on the Golden Spikes Award watch list. How do you think Tennessee's kind of might navigate this weekend with Doyle and Phillips? Because when they came to Fayetteville a month ago, it was Phillips making the game one start and Doyle starting in game two.
And that was also to keep Doyle on normal rest heading into the SEC tournament, and so he threw over 100 pitches Friday in Knoxville and then finished with 31 on Monday. And this is the same idea as Stone Lawless. It's not the same catching your pitchers in a bullpen session as in a super regional game. It is not the same throwing a bull. He might have thrown a bullpen session on a Monday or maybe a Tuesday after a regular season start. There is no comparison between throwing a bullpen and pitching a regional final as a closer. No comparison. So I would imagine he needs the added day and needs to pitch on the second day of the super regional, which keeps Marcus Phillips on his normal rest, because I think he started the second game for Tennessee. So that's what I would imagine you're going to see, which Doyle pitched the second game at Tennessee, and that turned out to be the first. That turned out to be the turning moment. Arkansas loses the first game of that series. Like, oh gosh, they got the guy who's going to probably be the national pitcher of the year. Throw in game two. What's going to happen? And they scored 8 runs on him just like that. So good Arkansas teams. I've seen this before. They did this with Brady Singer in 2018. You think, oh, it's a fluke. They beat Singer around when they played them in Gainesville. Then they faced him in Hoover. They knocked him around in Hoover. Then they faced him in Omaha. They knocked him around in Omaha. Brady Singer's a star in the major leagues. They had something on him. Maybe they have something on Doyle. I don't know.
And they saw Doyle last year when he was at Ole Miss, so it's a familiar face for some of these guys. Again, it's not a lot of the pieces last year aren't here this year, but when you get under a guy, I always felt in baseball, when you saw a guy once, you had his number. I remember facing pitchers and, having early success against the guy only helped for the later games where it's like he might be the best pitcher in the country or in the county or, whatever it was, but I know I have his number. I know what he's going to throw. I know what I'm looking for. So to your point, I think that's big for the Arkansas hitters who need to have another big week. Who in the lineup are you most keen on to have the big week this week? Is it, Kojal, Helfrich, or is it going to be an Aloy brother?
Well, I think a big guy is Logan Maxwell. And he looks as healthy as I think he's ever been at Arkansas, which may be the healthiest he's ever been, because I don't know if he's ever been healthy in his 4-year career. But when he's good, he's really good. He's a line-to-line hitter, power both ways, can run it down in the outfield. And to me, he's a real difference maker, because he's the guy that's been hitting behind Vahiva Aloy and ahead of whoever's batting cleanup. You're hitting third in the batting order. That's a sometimes that's almost a forgotten spot because sometimes the best power hitter's hitting second, your run producer's fourth or fifth, and the third hitter, it's not like he's forgotten about, but sometimes I feel like Maxwell gets forgotten about in this lineup. He's a really, really good hitter. He was the jewel of the, I think, of the transfer class. And it turns out you had a bunch of jewels out of the transfer class. But he's key to this team. Like when his hamstring wasn't right and he wasn't on the lineup sometimes, there were some moments where the lineup didn't feel quite as long. When he's in there, I think they're the toughest lineup in the country.
Not to mention, too, he's got the postseason experience. He's been to Omaha before with that TCU team who came into Fayetteville back in 2023 and, took the Hogs out in a couple of games. So I think Logan Maxwell, you're right, adds an extra piece of depth. And he does clearly, I forgot about him when I was asking you about your impact player. So clearly, I think that people kind of gloss over Logan Maxwell in a sense, but that just shows how important he is in that three hole. Curious for you, if Arkansas wants to win this what's the X thing that has to happen?
If they want to win the championship or they want to win the Super Regional?
If they want to get to Omaha.
They want to get to Omaha. Well, I mean, so you'd say win game one. Well, they lost game one in the regular season, ended up winning the next two. So I'm not sure if that's the thing. They just have to play as mistake-free as they can, which is to me the thing that defines this team when they're playing well. Mistake-free would be capitalizing on the mistakes by your opponent when you're a hitter. That's what they did against Liam Doyle. You can get away with mistakes that are 97, 98 miles an hour, but this Razorback team has bat speed to get around on that if it's a mistake and they're waiting on it. So don't let the pitches that you're waiting for go by. In terms of your pitchers, I mean, you can't walk batters, you can't hit batters, and if you're going to give up some home runs, look, Tennessee's going to hit some because that's what they do. Just don't allow it to come with men on base. Don't walk guys. That's the thing that really stood out from the last regional was that those teams that Arkansas played, they needed walks and hit batters in order to generate things. And that's just something this team doesn't do. And when you get a chance to turn a double play, turn it. When you make the regular plays you usually make, but I think you've got to finish double plays in this series. That is one aspect that they've struggled a little bit in the last few weeks. But if you have a chance to turn two against this team, you got to turn it. And I think Wood and Root and this pitching staff, well, they strike a lot of batters out. They also get their share of double play balls because there are certain pitches that are designed for it. And they've been good most of the year, but the right side of the infield's been a little bit different with Kojal and with Robinette, and that's where some of that turn comes from. So they have to turn those double plays when they get the chance.
Absolutely. Two more before we let you go. I know, we can read into history all we want. Tennessee has not won a series out in Fayetteville since 1996. Is that something that, fans maybe are making too big of a deal of, not a big deal about? Do you think history matters, especially now that we're in the postseason and you kind of throw away your whole season and you're just trying to win two games?
I think the only history that really matters is the history since Tony took over at Tennessee, which also means they haven't won a series in Fayetteville or beaten Arkansas in a series since Tony's been the head coach. This isn't a matter of, Dave's a better tactician than Tony or anything. I think Tony Vitello is a great baseball coach. I think Dave is a great baseball coach. It's just the Hogs have had this team's number for a long time, and so I don't know if that history plays into it, but it means something. And I also think it's true. Baum Walker is a really difficult place to play. And if you don't come in and play to your absolute best level, especially in the postseason, well, you're going to walk out with a loss.
Yeah, absolutely. Phil, last thing I'll ask you before we let you go, there's still another 7 Super Regionals this weekend. Do you have your eye on one maybe that fans at home can get excited besides the Arkansas one? Which Super might stand out to you?
Well, I mean, it's the one that Arkansas would be matched up against because if you think about the Hogs' road just to get to the finals, no team would have to face potentially the toughest lineup in the country outside of Arkansas's and the toughest starting rotation in the country and potentially LSU. So, that's a team that's beaten the Razorbacks 2 out of 3. And if you make it to Omaha, chances are you're playing LSU. So in that case, this is a little bit weird for somebody from Pittsburgh like me, grew up a Pitt fan. You got to root for WVU, which I don't really do very much, but I will this weekend.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's a really intriguing one. West Virginia, I think, won Big 12 regular season, and they are going down to Baton Rouge, and it's another one of those two that are really 1A, 1B in my eyes on
Duke
regionals.
and Murray State is fascinating too,
Yeah.
just because the Missouri Valley Conference. I think it's 5 years in a row that they've had a team in a super, but haven't made it to the College World Series, and they're looking to break through. And then Duke, they're playing at. I don't know if you've ever seen their park on campus because they can't play at the AAA facility where they play a lot of their conference games.
Hmm.
This is a tiny little ballpark that will have more open grass than there are seats. It will be a bizarre setting, really. And Duke hasn't been to Omaha since 1961,
Oh,
and
wow.
Murray State's never been. So
Mhm.
this is, I mean, that kind of stuff is really fun.
Yeah, someone's going to break a long streak. Well, Phil, thank you so much for joining the show. That's going to do it for this portion of the rubber match. We'll wrap up shop after the break. Stick around. A big thanks, as always, to Phil Elson for joining the rubber match this week. Before we completely wrap shop, let's just take a look at kind of some of the super regionals this week, and I'll give you kind of my quick predictions. I did this on TikTok. If you want a full breakdown, you can go over there, but as always, I'm going to do it in the rubber match. So here we go. Here are the 8 super regionals this weekend. The Louisville Super Regional, which, if you remember, would have been Southern Miss and Vanderbilt. Instead, it's an ACC showdown between Louisville and Miami. Then you got Corvallis, which is Oregon State, and Florida State Chapel Thrill Regional. That's just what I'm going to call it. North Carolina and Arizona. Auburn Regional against Coastal Carolina. This one could be one of the more intriguing ones of a UCLA club that has been up and down all season against UTSA, who just took down Texas in the Austin Regional. Then we wrap shop. Phil and I already discussed the last 3, the Durham Super Regional, Baton Rouge Super Regional, and Fayetteville Super Regional. So here are the 16 teams left standing with a chance to get to Omaha. 16 this weekend, then we get down to 8 at the College Baseball World Series. So I think the most ones that we didn't talk about yet that I'm looking forward to, probably the Chapel Hill Super Regional is my number one. That, again, we have not talked about already because I just think that the guys from UNC playing really good baseball, and Arizona also in the Big 12 playing good baseball. So that's going to be a really fun super regional to watch. I think Miami-Louisville is going to be very intriguing. Miami has been kind of dormant in college baseball the last couple of years, so nice to see them have a bit of the resurgence again. And the only regional besides the Arkansas one and Auburn one that we haven't talked about, that is an 8-9, a true seed versus seed matchup, is that Corvallis Super Regional, Alex Lodice in Florida State against the Oregon State Beavers. So that's where we stand. These are the final super regionals as we wrap up shop here on the rubber match. So a big thanks once again to Phil Ellis. We'll have your coverage all weekend long over on our Big Trail Nation YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you name it. We've got you covered, like I said. And if you like more of this content, be sure to tune in to 479 First. That's where you can get all of our Big Trail Nation streaming content right away. So this will be airing and more stuff. We have Jacob Morris with Hog Roundup earlier this week. Mike Irwin and I on PTN Extra. We're all talking baseball this week. It's the biggest thing right now. So that is going to do it for the rubber match this week. Thanks all for tuning in. We'll see you back here next week on the show.